Welcome to Voices Encouraged, Thrive While Loving an Addict. We're back again, and today I'm so excited to introduce you to an author, four-time author, Ian Morgan Cron, and he is an Episcopal priest. He's written 4 books, and he's an Enneagram coach. He is a therapist. He brings a lot of wisdom and experience to the table, and he is recovering and recently experienced a relapse during 2020. So has recently, been on the journey of recovery again after decades of recovery. So his latest book is called The Fix: How the 12 Steps actually offer a surprising path of transformation for the well-adjusted, the down and out, and everyone in between. What's really interesting about him is his belief that everybody deals with addiction. And so, welcome, Ian. Well, as I said earlier, I'm super excited to have Ian Morgan Cron with me today, and we're just going to start and launch. And what brought us together today is the release of his new book, which I referenced earlier. So I am very curious as to what prompted you to write this book now.
So first of all, thank you for having me on your podcast today.
You're welcome.
Well, it's born out of a few things. One is it's born out of my own personal experience, right? I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict, and I am the father of a recovering addict. I am married to an Al-Anon Ninja. My father and his 2 sisters both died of alcoholism, and I have another sibling in recovery. I mean, we like to laugh at my family and say that addictions don't run in our family, they gallop. And so, it's just born out of my own experience and what the 12 steps have done for my life. Secondly, why now is because, as Brene Brown has observed, we live in the most addicted cohort in history.
Right.
And, my thing was, look, there are these miracles happening in the rooms of recovery that others could derive benefit from, even if they don't identify in the classic sense of the word as alcoholics or addicts.
Okay, great. So you are quite raw and honest in, your struggles with addiction and relapse, which I completely appreciate. And what do you think the biggest thing that people need to understand about addiction and recovery?
Well, first, I'd say that addictions are very complicated, right? People tend to think of them, oh, it's just trauma, or it's it's bad, it's a absence of willpower, or whatever it is, right? And it's
Right.
like, oh, I wish it was that simple. It is so much more complicated. And for me, an addiction is any unhealthy, compulsive relationship with a person, a behavior, or a substance that has mood altering effects and negative consequences, right? That you continue to engage in that behavior or substance, even if it has really dire effect your well-being, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know anybody who doesn't fit into this category. Like in my mind, addiction is just part of the human condition, right? Attachments might be another word. Now, there is a continuum, right, from mild to severe, but regardless of where you are on that continuum, your addictions and self-defeating recurrent behaviors diminish your life, and the 12 steps can help.
Right. And so what I am wondering is, do you see addictions, the way you describe it, as the doorway to a spiritual awakening?
I think they're an invitation to a spiritual awakening. I think that the 12 steps facilitate a spiritual awakening, right? So think of the addiction as the invitation and the steps as the process by which a person has a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it renders unnecessary the need for a compulsive relationship with a person, a behavior, or a substance, right? It's one of the things I love about the steps, right? The steps are not designed to get someone to stop being codependent or addicted to eating or gambling or sports betting or, porn or drugs or alcohol, right? It's like, that's not the stated purpose. The stated purpose is a spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
The byproduct of which will be freedom from your compulsions.
And so, we all know that shame and guilt and self-loathing play a tremendous role in all of this. How do you see kind of unlocking that to be able to get to the point where you're willing to enter a room, or you're willing to entertain the notion of a different way?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we talk in the rooms a lot about the gift of desperation, right? And the fact of the matter is, we people have to sort of reach a sort of a moment of reckoning, at which they finally get honest with themselves, and they are able to utter what I think are the three most courageous words in the human vocabulary, which is "I need help." As one of my coaching clients once said to me at his moment of reckoning, he said, "I'm out of ammo," right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just out of ammo. Like, I have
Yeah.
tried everything with my unaided willpower to
Mm-hmm.
over this pattern of behavior in my life. And in his situation, it was more of a sex addiction, a process addiction. And he's
Yeah.
like, "I'm out of ammo, man." And I'm like, "Good. Now we're ready. Now we can start," right?
Mm-hmm.
But until
Mm-hmm.
you're ready to get to that place, the door is not completely open yet.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true, on the loved one side of the equation too, is we need to be ready to ask for help. And there's a complete reframe, at least my experience was, there's a complete reframe around y- understand what addiction is, but what's my role as a mom?
Yeah.
And changing the mom code or the dad code or the sister or the brother code. And so I'm curious, as the dad of someone who is dealing with substance use disorder, how has that been for you?
Well, it was wild, terrible, and wonderful as the journey goes. So
Yeah.
my son is in recovery. He's 2.5 years sober now. He's
Uh-huh.
doing fantastic. Uh,
Awesome.
but, but
Congratulations.
but we had 3 rodeos. We had three
Hmm.
rounds of treatment. We
Hmm.
we made all the mistakes that, even though I'm a psychotherapist,
Hmm.
and it doesn't
Hmm.
matter. I
Hmm.
made all the same
Hmm.
mistakes that every parent makes
Right.
when they have a kid who is struggling with substance use disorder. And so for me, I say wild, wonderful, and terrible. Wild because at its peak, it was a nightmare. And yet, in its healing, my son and I and our family has discovered a love and intimacy with each other that we previously didn't know was available to us.
Hmm.
And it has turned out that addiction, I no longer necessarily see addiction as the enemy, but now I
Hmm.
see it as the teacher. And it has brought so many gifts to us. And I know that's not universally everybody's experience. I know
Hmm.
people will be at different levels and different
Hmm.
places in their journey. Maybe as a word of hope, that's what it has been for us.
Yeah. And so, because our audience is the loved ones, I'm wondering, at the moment of desperation for you, and how did you handle that? Because we all know that, I mean, the latter part of my son's relapse was fentanyl. And so every moment of every day was a crapshoot. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, how did you work with the crapshoot? Because we're suspending things as best we can in hopes that they will live through this disease, and without any certainty at all. So, how did you deal with that part?
Yeah, two ways maybe. The first is, I remember we were with a counselor at my son's, I don't know which treatment center it was. I think it was the first one. And the psychologist said to us, he said, "Look, if you want to help Aiden, if you want to help him,
Mm-hmm.
then the first thing you have to do is help yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to figure out how to take care of you and work on you." And I
Mm-hmm.
remember my wife, who's a very wonderful, beautiful person, but she's kind of a peacemaker, doesn't like conflict, she wasn't a person who was interested on a really deep inner journey, just wasn't her style.
Right.
This light went on in her eyes like, oh, in quote unquote, save my son, I first have to save myself.
Yes.
And I just remember that light going on, and she threw herself into it. As I said before we hit record, she is an Al-Anon Ninja,
Mm-hmm.
and just bought the program hook, line, and sinker because she felt like that is my role to play here. Right. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing was, and I don't know how people can do it otherwise. I mean, I had to develop a spiritual life that was of enough substance that it could buoy me in
Mm-hmm.
the middle of having to say, I'm out of control here.
Right.
Like I have to give this to somebody else to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually remember someone, clergy person, friend of mine, said something really profound to me. They said, Ian, you need to remember that Aiden is God's kid first. I still get a little puddly when I say it.
Mm.
Like, he is God's child first, not yours. He,
Right.
you're second.
Right.
And he said, so you're going to have to turn this over.
Yeah.
And that was really comforting. It didn't eliminate my anxiety entirely, because
Yeah.
you do kind of live with the "is today the day" thing.
Right. Yeah.
but every time the phone rings, is this the call? But having a program of recovery for myself. Secondly, just having to cling and surrender, embrace my powerlessness were critical.
I talk a lot in my work around the whole self-care piece. And I remember talking to a CEO a number of years ago, and his son was dealing with substance use disorder. And his son said the same thing. His son said the same thing to him, which is, Dad, you need to do your work. And I will always remember, Andy telling me that. And I had already grabbed a hold of that and have all along the way been consistent in doing my work and up-leveling my work and raising levels of consciousness and so on and so forth. What I am curious about, Ian, is, how do I say this? Do you think about this from the meta perspective in terms of, obviously your son is God's child, as we all are, or whatever higher power you believe. Do you see it through the lens of the larger social context or the larger humanitarian leveling up of consciousness? And that's obviously a bigger leap question.
Yeah,
but I'm curious.
Yeah, I think there's something magical that happens, and it's so magical and profound that I'm always hesitant to even speak about it, because it's like trying to explain a poem. It's like either the poem lands or it doesn't, right? And for me, I think embracing the fact that we are little bipeds on a planet spinning at 67,000 miles an hour through space, right? That in the admission of powerlessness, it's like quantum physics. When you finally embrace powerlessness and surrender to what is, then there is an elevation of consciousness that brings you into harmony with what is in the world. And which is completely counterintuitive, because, every time you plug take back control of your life into Google, you'll get 1 trillion answers, right? Like that is what every marketing firm is trying to get you to believe. Use our product and take control back for your life, right?
Right.
It's just so counterintuitive. It's like Jedi material. You know what I mean? It's just like, when you let go, then you're caught. It's like, it's this kind of spiritual judo. By surrendering, you're getting the power you thought you were getting before. It's crazy, but that's how it works.
Yes. Well, I talk a lot about mindset shifts and the fact that I believe, after having numerous experiences, outside of my own son's issues, that when my life has been falling apart, it's actually been falling together. And so it relates from how I think about that to what you just said, is what we think we know. A lot of it isn't true. And so there's a reframing that I do believe is necessary. I talk a lot about wanting to thrive in the midst of the chaos of all of this. And that's an aspiration that we're speaking about in terms of, like Byron Katie's work and Eckhart Tolle's work and so on, and Brene Brown's work and so on and so forth. And so I'm curious, was it your son's struggle that was the real cracking you wide open to see that it was equally important for you to take care of yourself, and there was a bigger piece in this?
And I write about this in The Fix. For me, the most important thing in that season of life was that I was deeply engaged in my own journey of recovery, as an addict and alcoholic.
Right.
I had the advantage of that working with him. I came in locked and loaded.
Right.
My wife came in fresh. She was running to catch up in the beginning. Now she has surpassed me. But in the beginning, she was, in fact, just
good on her. That's great.
I went in the kitchen the other day and I said to her something. I was complaining about something and, just off the rails. And she was doing the dishes and she turned around, she looked at me, she goes, "Thanks for sharing. Keep coming back."
Oh, that's so great. That's so great.
That's the thing, in this book, The Fix, right, which is this exploration of the steps as a design for living for everybody. There is humor in the journey, right? There is joy in this journey. And it's not a dreary, glum thing. I mean, it is serious. It can be grave depending on the circumstances.
Right.
At the same time, the book, I was trying to set out to write a book about the steps that was not only substantive, meaningful, directive, but also had a good Irish sense of humor.
And you do have a good Irish sense of humor. That was one of the threads that was consistent.
Yeah, because I think that if it's a journey of healing, then joy has to be part of it. If there's no joy in it, then there's something may be awry.
Yes. Well, I think there's a couple things that are going through my head. One is that I think parents in particular, it's so serious that they don't feel that they can experience joy, that they can't laugh, that they can't have their life in the midst of this grave thing that's going on. And so I remember I posted in a Facebook page one time, does anybody believe that you can actually thrive in the midst of this disease? And I got this, like, absolutely not. Like, no way, no how, not going to happen. And so unlocking the key from our own hijacking to releasing ourselves to have the life that is ours to have.
So maybe one of the ways I'd put it is this, right? And this is just for me, right?
Yeah.
I would say that joy is not the absence of suffering. It is the knowledge of the presence of the divine.
Say that again.
Joy is not the absence of suffering. It is the knowledge of the presence of the divine. And so that means that, yes, even in these deep, dark struggles, and I think the steps help us get to this place where we have a knowledge of the immanence, the absolute nearness, God, as I choose to call my higher power. So that's where I think people think of joy, they think of it more as the absence of suffering. And it's like, no, actually, you're talking about, that's happiness. Happiness is kind of that, right? And that's a lower level of consciousness. Joy is a higher level of consciousness that says, oh, I'm suffering and I have an acute awareness of the presence of love, of the divine in my life, which is a kind of joy.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. To be able to hold both in the same space.
Yeah. One of the things my sponsor was always reminding me of, he's always like, Ian, two things can exist at the same time, right? You can love your son and resent the hell out of him right now. Both of those things can exist side by side with each other. And that's just part of the tension of the human life, right? Like, we are bags of contradictions. And just learning to live with that is also part of my program.
Right. So speak a little bit about the power of community.
Yeah, I write a lot about this in The Fix, right? Like, the old trope, right? That the opposite of addiction is connection, right? It's not sobriety, it's connection.
Right.
We live in an age where loneliness is so endemic, and codependency, addictions of all kinds, they just breed in darkness and isolation. And so, for me, community is the great accelerant of healing. So you could buy my book, The Fix. It has a workbook. And by the way, the subtitle is How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. And, I say in the book, look, if you have an identified addiction or mental health issue, like codependency, workaholism, overeating, sugar addiction, gambling, sports betting, which is becoming a huge problem, et cetera, whatever your thing is, there's probably a 12-step group available to you right now. Like online meetings or in-person meetings. You could go to CODA meetings, you could go to Al-Anon. We're really blessed, right, with all these 12-step types of paths. Or you could certainly read The Fix and do the workbook and do the steps yourself, and you will derive benefit. But you will exponentially experience more growth if you do it. And I tell people in the book, go find 5 people and do a book group for 12 weeks together. Just go through the steps together. Something good will happen if you do that. Yeah.
Well, I think, number one, I'm totally in agreement with you. I mean, I'm a business coach and consultant. So in the business world, what we know is, 95% of your success is who you surround yourself with, which is what we're talking about really here. It's that we're not skilled up in how to sift and sort through the caliber of people that are going to hold us with love and non-judgment and help us rise to the better versions of ourselves.
I mean, that is absolutely true. And in fact, I'm just writing something down as you said it, because it sparked something in me to actually mention to one of my coaching clients. And, it's interesting, isn't it? Like in coaching settings, so I have a bunch of corporate clients and they come to me usually to work with the Enneagram, which is what I previously was an author writing about. But it's so interesting how often I end up doing 12-step work with them and they don't know it. I'm not advertising what I'm doing.
Right.
But that's what I'm doing with them a lot of the times. It's like I'm being paid to be a sponsor, but in the corporate setting, and because the wisdom translates, right?
Yes.
It's not, again, people tend to, silo the 12 steps as being, oh, that's only for addicts and alcoholics, right? And I'm like, you got it wrong, man. You have got it wrong, because that's not their stated purpose. What it is doing and is trying to facilitate that spiritual awakening. You might use the term the leveling up of consciousness, right? Like whatever you want to call it, that's what it can provide for you.
Right. Well, I I kind of have the same experience. I obviously work with people who are coming to me for either executive leadership coaching to up their skills in that area, or strategic planning, or, how do we scale our business, or, da 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 da. They don't know that their journey is going to be about a spiritual awakening, but it always is, because you have to start with the person first. If anything's going to change around you, it has to start with you first. And so that's kind of the doorway that I walk through to do my work too. And so let me ask a different question. I'm curious because I read a book back in the 90s called The Paradigm Conspiracy, which was the comparative contrast over two paradigms. One is power over and control of, which is pretty much the global world that we live in, and a soul honoring world, which was exemplified by the Iroquois Confederacy. And I wonder, that has been a great framing for me in terms of understanding how I choose to walk in the world in the soul honoring perspective versus the power over control piece. And yet it's so countercultural that the work that I need to do to continue to be shored up, true and authentic and vulnerable in that, as Brene Brown would speak to, is big work. And so what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the power and control thing. There's no question that we live in a world where power and control are perceived as maybe the means of self-advancement and or of acquiring the life you want, right? And that it will provide the security and safety that your heart longs for. And it doesn't, right? And it also inflicts harm on others, right? Now, the soul honoring route, and I don't know exactly the source of your sort of definition of that, but I think I get the idea, right? If you change your mindset from one that is about self-aggrandizement, right, to one that is focused on how do I bring the highest expression of who I am to the world and serve as an agent of love and healing in my business, in my family, in my personal life, then you have a sense of mission, right?
Yeah.
This becomes a missional deal. And can we turn the forces of power and control and domination around in the world? Not alone, but we play our part. And for me, like I said, most people I know, when it comes to the topic of transformation and change in themselves and in the world, they just don't have a plan.
Yeah.
Like they don't have a plan. Like they're just winging it. They're doing the best they can, but they have vague ideas. Sometimes they're platitudinal and, just like whatever, but they just don't have a plan. And for me, the 12 steps became such a useful plan for how do I become that person?
Right.
And it does it by healing and the ruptures in my relationship with my higher power, with others, with myself, and then giving me tools that will cultivate a lifestyle that promotes health and growth in each of those three domains of my life moving forward. And that's something I describe pretty clearly in the fix.
And then you have obviously the community to support that.
I do. And I'm really fortunate that way. Like I had dinner with my sponsor last night. I went to a meeting. I probably talk to 2 or 3 people a day that are in a program of recovery. And it's not the whole of my life. Like I have tons of friends who are not in recovery. It's not like, oh my gosh, you get into that recovery business and you're going to be like in that zone forever and you're not going to have a life outside of it.
Right.
I have a super rich life outside of it. But I would say I wouldn't have that super rich life outside of it if I didn't have that program of recovery supporting me.
You're right. Exactly. Yeah. So again, we're touching on these things that I think are foundationally important in order for the transformation of lives to take place. And speak to me a little bit about having, decades of sobriety and then having the relapse and how that experience was transformative for you in a different way.
Yeah. So I often like to say that, decades ago, I came into recovery. I was 27 years old. I was a young man and I was in Connecticut and I was a lost bird. And, my first go round, I like to say I just audited the class. I wasn't taking it for credit yet. You know what I mean? And actually, it wasn't entirely my fault. This is back in a period of time when there wasn't a lot of treatment centers or rehabs. That just wasn't a thing yet. That was actually just for the very, very, very wealthy. They would be like special,
Yes,
like,
I
go out to
remember.
go to the farm. And, so the only option was go to a 12-step meeting, right? And I had this therapist who said to me, listen, man, I can't do anything with you until you get sober. And I'm like, ugh. So I went to this 12-step meeting. And everybody was much, much older than I was. I didn't know how to connect, and I didn't find a sponsor, et cetera. But I was fortunate that I got enough of the program that it expelled my desire for any substances. And for decades, I lived without them. Then comes COVID, and there's this relapse. And this time, rather than just auditing the class, I was taking it for credit.
Yeah.
And so this go round, even though I was super familiar with the steps and the principles of recovery, now it was something that I was actually living a profound way for myself. So this time around, I'd say the big difference was doing the stuff you're supposed to do. Get a sponsor, right? Like go to meetings, read the literature, do your, have a spiritual life, et cetera, et cetera. But this time around, I'd say it was a legitimate spiritual awakening for me. Like it was like something like, okay, you talk about a mindset shift. I mean, like a complete revolutionizing of the way I thought and the way that I saw the world. And I found so much joy and freedom in it. And of course there was struggle, but really joy and freedom in it. And that we always laugh, right? Because at 12-step meetings, they pass a basket. And if you got $1, you throw $1 in the basket. It just helps pay the rent at the church or wherever you're meeting.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, I come out of those meetings all the time and I hear stuff and I think, oh my gosh, I only paid $1 for that.
Right.
I mean, that's crazy, right? Like it's crazy in that community of wisdom. I hear stuff from 19-year-olds who are living in their cars. They'll say something. I'll go like, I'm a licensed therapist. That is like brilliant what you just said. And I paid $1 for it, and it's like, it's kind of kooky. So yeah, I mean, I feel like the whole experience of addiction in my life, and I know this isn't true for everybody. So I just put it out there as my experience. Yeah. It has been a gift. It turned into a gift. And I didn't anticipate that, at the beginning, but it ended up being a gift that led me into a pattern of living and also an understanding of myself and the world that I could not have gotten any other way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I have thanked my son for his journey because it was only through him, I think, this is my story right now, that I would have gotten cracked as wide open as I did in order to elevate to do the work. The pain of a couple experiences with him was so profoundly altering. I had no place else to go but shifting.
Yep. So I had a friend of mine say something to me the other day that was really pretty profound. He said, a day comes when you end up loving the very thing that you most wish hadn't happened to you.
Right.
And I thought, whoa, that is actually incredible. A day comes when you end up loving the very thing you most wish hadn't happened to you. And I thought, boy, that can be true, can it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big believer in there's a gift and opportunity in everything that takes place. Like everything that takes place. And I think that, that's part of my message to a lot of people that I work with is, okay, we can unpack this and we're also going to look for the other side of the coin. What are the gifts, opportunities, lessons embedded in this moment for you? Because it has shown up for a reason. And that reason is to serve.
Yep. I'm with you.
So just looking at a couple questions I had here, I want to make sure. I want to just touch briefly on, I like the terminology that you used, spiritual workaround. Could you say a little bit more about what that means for you?
Yeah, this is an idea in the fix in the first couple of chapters. I talk about addictions as being spiritual workarounds, right? So let me put it this way. You'll often hear people say something like, oh, Jim has a drinking problem or Joan has a drug problem. And I'm like, okay, I understand why you're saying that, but let's exercise some more precision with the language. Actually, Jim has a drinking solution. Joan has a drug solution. Drugs and drinking are not the problem. They're the solution. In the minds of those two people, that's the solution to a problem, right?
Yeah.
And what happens is when you do that, kind of shift the language around, what comes up is empathy and compassion. Like, oh, now I get it. Like, this isn't the problem. I've been thinking all along, this is the problem, but it's actually the solution. And it's really that the addict or the alcoholic they don't have a problem with drinking or drugs. They have a problem with living, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I could unpack that, but that's pretty it's a big topic, right?
Yes.
And they have looked for a solution through a misguided attempt to solve the problem on their own. So that's a spiritual workaround, because the only thing that can solve the problem with living really is a power greater than you. And so those, our addictions, our compulsions, whatever they may be, in that sense, become spiritual workarounds, right? You're trying to, on your own unaided willpower, you are trying to solve a problem without God's help, as I choose to call my higher power, right? So you've got to stop the workaround and go to the source of where the solution can be found.
That's brilliantly said. I remember I was on a panel with a doctor out of California, Fresno, who spoke about the solution and that we needed to shift as parents, as friends, our notion about what is really going on here. And the compassion piece for a lot of people is such a big lift, because they're caught up in their fear and their anger and their frustration and their desperation to make it different than what it is, because they believe that, the drugs and the alcohol is the problem.
Yeah. And when that shift takes place, good things can start to happen. And the other thing that happens too in those settings, right, is, as we mentioned earlier, right, like when you have someone in your life who has a drug or a drinking problem, the situation cracks you open in such a way that you become available to a new way of seeing and doing life. In the beginning, that can cause a little bit of resentment, right? Like it's a little bit like, oh, now you're going to make me do my work? Oh, great. Now I got to worry about you and work on me. It's like, oh, great.
This I just had that conversation.
Yeah. It's like, this is insult to injury, right? Like, oh my gosh, like, I mean, this is ridiculous. But the answer is yes, it is an invitation to you to do your own work. In so doing, you will create the highest probability that there will be healing on the other side of the equation, namely with the person that you love who's struggling with an addiction. I'm not saying it's a guarantor. I've been in plenty of Al-Anon meetings with people who still go after their children have died, from a substance. And so I'm not naive. I don't think, oh boy, if you just start doing your work, everything ends well. There's no guarantee of that. But what I do know is that I meet tons of people that when they decided to work on themselves, it just created, again, the natural environment in which change in your target person, right, is most likely to happen. You're creating the highest possibility of success. So that's what happened for us, right, with my son. My wife's going to Al-Anon, my kid is using, and a day comes where, based on everything that we'd learned in those rooms, we had to say, without any anger, without any resentment, son, we love you, and you have to pack and leave because you're using under our roof. And that was a condition of your living here that you would not use.
Yeah.
And there was yelling and there was screaming and there was crying and I don't have any money and I don't have a car and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, we're really sorry that this is uncomfortable for you. That said, you have an hour. And then he spent a couple of days on the street, and trust me, my kid grew up in a pretty privileged situation, and I'm like, so the street was not a welcome environment for him. And then the call came 3 days later from him, and then we pulled a therapist onto the call with us, and he's like, I'm ready to do anything. I've got a problem. So again, I know that sounds kind of fairy tale-ish, but the fact of the matter is that when we did our own work, and we set our own boundaries and began to be healthy, then suddenly it created this environment in which something had to give on his end.
Can you speak a little bit about how that moment was for you to say, what you said to him, and you have an hour?
Remarkably calm.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it was remarkably calm. There was nothing, there was no anger, there was no yelling. And I remember my sponsor saying, dude, you can be really, this can come from a place of love, not from discipline or severity. It was just, this is how it is. And these are the terms. And so of relationship and mutuality. And so all of the resistance, the anger, resentment were on the other side of the equation. They weren't on our side. Right? And so there was nothing really left we didn't give Aiden a toehold. Like, if we had gotten angry, now suddenly he's got a toehold.
Right.
We were just being like, just a loving, non-anxious presence, and it worked.
The way that I think about it is, his addiction had hijacked him. And so you didn't engage with, I see them separately. Like my son, Sam, is not his addiction. And so I knew when I was dealing with the addiction, and I knew when I was dealing with my son. And so by really dealing with your son, almost bypassing the addiction, by loving him, holding space for him, by telling him the truth and being calm and loving and present with him, you were talking to him. Is that how it feels to you?
Sure. I think it's helpful to think about what's happening in through the lens of two realities, right? You're speaking both to a person and to their addiction, right? So like I remember, so like I mentioned earlier, like I'm a therapist, right? And I remember there was a moment in Aiden's hardest times where I thought, does he have a narcissistic personality disorder? Like, and I know what that means. So it's not like I was just throwing,
Right.
well, no, because, people throw that word around now all the time.
Oh,
They don't
yeah.
actually even know what it means.
Right.
And in the clinical sense, what they think it is just somebody who's overly grandiose and maybe talks about themselves too much. And I'm like, actually, it's quite the clinical picture of a narcissist is much more complicated. And I'm like, but I really did worry about it because the absolute lack of empathy on his part was just stunning sometimes. And then I realized one day, he's not a narcissist. It's just this is how people act when they're in addiction, right?
Yes.
And so when he got sober, I all of a sudden the green shoots of empathy and compassion started to come out in him, like where he began to say, "I'm sorry," or "That's my responsibility. Sorry about," you know what I mean? And I was like, "Oh, thank gosh!" But it was his addiction. It was his addiction that was so, had that narcissistic quality to it. And so, yeah, making the delineation between those two things could be very helpful.
It was for me. And I'm thinking about a conversation that I had the other day, and it was a very different way for that father to think about it. But I said, the way that I think about addiction is it has taken first position in our brains in terms of survival. And you will do anything to survive. That doesn't at all marry up with the heart and soul of who you really are. And that's absolutely who my son is. I know who the heart and soul of who he is. And it is nothing like that addiction. And so for me to be able to hold those two knowings in the same space, then I could be much more centered and strong as his mom. Yeah. So we could talk for a while, I'm sure. But in wrapping this up, what I'm super curious about is what's one core truth that you would really want to leave with our listeners that's embedded in the fix?
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a couple. One is 12 steps are not just for classically defined alcoholics and addicts, right? Like anybody from the well-adjusted to the down and out would derive benefit from working a program of recovery, right? Doing the 12, practicing the 12 steps. Secondly, that the answer here is not a clinical psychology answer, although, listen, I'm a big fan, right? Obviously. But really, it has to do with spirituality, right? Like that is the answer to the problem. And all these other things can be terrific supports, but at the end of the day, what will bring about this psychic change that Bill W. talks about, this kind of internal rearrangement, or you might use mindset change. That is the answer ultimately that leads to recovery. And so it's multi-pronged, but I just commend those steps to everybody in the book and show them how to do it. Try to do it in a way that's enjoyable and brings both gravity and humor to the equation, right? And hopefully we'll help a few people discover, if you're a churchgoer, for example, I'm always telling people, do you know what's going on in your basement at those 12-step meetings? Do you have any idea of what's going on down there? Like if you did, you would want more of it upstairs, wouldn't you? It's like, well, guess what? You can just, there's this wisdom downstairs in these churches, synagogues, and, whatever people meet in these meetings. There's a kind of genius that's happening down there that's available to everybody. And that they've saved tens of millions of people. Why can't they change you? Of course they can. So get to work.
Yeah. Well, there's a realness and a rawness to those conversations. My dad was an Episcopal minister. So even as a young kid, I saw the hypocrisy in what was going on. And so I totally appreciate being in those rooms. And I create those rooms in business where we can tell the truth about who we are, what's really going on. We can lay the masks aside and be vulnerable and truthful with each other. as
Yes.
humans. So I just want to say thank you for writing this book. Thank you for being on the podcast today. This has been a really great conversation. We've, kind of soared in all these different directions that I completely appreciate. And thank you for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay. Take care.